All right, so welcome back. So things are going well. So we can manually add data. So just kind of like using the back end. So right now it says was Time Warner, but if I change it like on my back end to just say, I don't know, Time Warner, you can see that it'll actually just live update to that. So we're reading data successfully, which is a huge step, which is kind of neat. By the way, I'm showing mine with 2 columns right here, but I recommend that you show yours with 3. So the columns, I recommend that you do 3. You've probably got enough screen real estate from that. I also realized that I didn't get things checked in last time, getting kind of worse about that. But I really should go ahead and do that check-in. So this is retrieve data from Firebase. That's what we did last time. And so what we want to do this time is there's still a lot to do. We could make it look better, right? That's one thing we could do. But instead, what I think I'm going to do is add data. So I'm going to add a button to add data. If you look at the production one, so this is the one that's actually finished, our goal is to have a floating action button that is only visible on the main page. And when you click it, it's going to show a dialog that lets you add new things, right? So this is my test from Fisher DS, and this is from my solution version, right? So you don't have any of that stuff yet, but it's from my solution version. Interestingly enough, my prod and my local are pulling from the same data, so you can see that it actually says that's from my solution. It says test. I don't really want that on here. And you'll notice that it actually did get a real, like, genuine key as opposed to these auto-generated things we did. So that's our goal, is to make those things happen. So the first thing we need is HTML to show a floating action button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over into my HTML for main. And I'm going to go ahead and add a button. So I want a button. Interestingly, buttons can actually be made with anchors or with button attributes. I'm going to do this with an anchor where I give it the attribute of a FAB. And you can see that that's one of the attributes that you can give to buttons, right? So a circular button with elevation defaults to the accent color. So that's what we want. So I'm going to come back in here. So yeah, right there is where I want to be. And this is my floating action button. And what I want my floating action button to have in it is I want an MD icon in here. And that icon that I want is called add. And so I'm going to close up my icon and close up my anchor. The other thing that I want to do, while you can save it, and you can see that it's going to work disastrously, so it's going to put an add button on here somewhere. So it put it over here. And that's because right now it's in the flow, and you know, like if this page were to scroll up and down, so if I were to make it small, you would just see it's just part of the page, just like these passwords are part of the page. So that's not what I want. I want it to kind of like float over here. It's a floating action button. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to create some CSS to get it where I want it to go. So I'm just going to come into my main Sassy CSS here, and I'm just going to kind of start working on this button. And so what I want to do is I want some way to capture it. So it's an anchor tag, which has an attribute of MD FAB. So I mean, I think that should capture it just fine. To be honest, it's my only anchor, so I could have done less, but I'm fine with doing that. And what I want to do here is I first want to set the position to be fixed. So that makes it not go in the flow. When you make something fixed, it defaults to where it would have gone in the flow. But as soon as you start setting like lefts and rights, then it's going to go to that location instead. So if I say right 20 pixels, as soon as I hit save here, it should snap over to this side. So now it's snapped over to that side. And then I don't want it to be dependent upon how many quotes are on there. So I'm actually going to set the bottom as well to also be 20 pixels. And so now it should snap to that location there. And the other thing it should do is it should not scroll with the page anymore. So if I scroll here, you can see that it doesn't go with the rest of the page because it's a fixed button at this point. Cool, so there's our CSS for it. The next thing I want to do is I want to make clicking it do something, right? So I'm going to say click, and I've got to decide what do I want click to call. I have a method called show password dialog. I think in my notes I wrote add password, but really it's just showing the dialog. So I'm going to have it say show password dialog. So save that up, go over to my TypeScript, make a new function. You can put it wherever you'd like to in this file. I'm just going to put it at the bottom. This function is not gonna return anything. It's just gonna show a dialog. And then what you can do is you can do just a quick test. So I'm just gonna have it say show dialog really quickly. And now whenever it refreshes, I can click on it and it says show dialog, and that much is working. So the next thing we need to do is how do we show a dialog? So we come over to our buddy Angular Material 2 and we say, hey, tell me about dialogues. And so it's got an example here of dialogue. So you click on open dialog and it's supposed to do this, right? So it pops up and it says, hi, I'm a dialog. You go look at the code for this and you can see that the HTML was just calling a function, open dialog. So all the interesting things happen in the TypeScript. And so here's what the TypeScript does. So it says this.dialog.open, and then it passes in another component that's going to be in the dialog. So you can see that it used dependency injection for dialog. So I guess I can go ahead and copy that part. And so I'm going to stick that up into my constructor. So my constructor's got all kinds of things going on now. It says public here, but to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's public or private. They said it didn't matter and they made it public. And I said it didn't matter and I made it private. It wants to import from someplace, either Angular Material typings or Angular Material. What I really want is I want to take off the material, and I just want Angular Material. It did the same thing with the router, so I wasn't really surprised by that. And you can see that it works fine here. And so what I want to do here is I want to say this.dialog.open. And then I'm going to pass in, as you can see in their example over here, the name of a class that I want to be in it. So in order to have a name of a class, I'm going to have to go make a new component. And so the new component that I'm going to have to make, I'm going to say ngg component. And this is going to be what's inside of my dialog. And I'm just going to go and call it password dialog. It's interesting that when you make something, you can kind of give it whatever case you want, and then it'll decide what case to use at appropriate times. I kind of make them look like variables here, and it tends to work out for me. So this component is not a route. So it's actually one of our first non-routes, which is kind of funny. But it is special in another way in that it's a pop-up dialog. And there's something different you have to do for pop-up dialogs. So let's go fix up these things. So the first thing I want to do is I want to see what files it made. And it made another folder here called password dialog. It made a spec file. I don't know what to do with that. And then it also added it to the app module. Just so I can see the changes, I'm going to view it in Git. And you can see I added the import, which is good. It added it to the declarations here. Oh man, it added a comma on the line above. I hate that. I'm going to add a trailing comma so that doesn't happen again. So you can see that that's what it's done so far. And that's fine. That's all good. We're just going to add a little bit more. And so the little bit more that we're going to add, so there's declarations, which is for all your components. There's imports for all your modules. And then things that are pop-up dialogs actually need something else. They need something called an entry component. So you're going to add a new field called entry components. And so entry components are things that are pretty much only pop-up dialogs. And all you have to do here is you just have to say password dialog component here as well, and give it a trailing comma, of course. And so it's listed in two places. It's listed in the declarations because it's a component, and then because it's a pop-up dialog, you also have to list it in entry components as well. Cool. And so back over to our main TS, we've got this.dialog.open, and what we want to pass in here is password dialog component. Sure wish it had helped me type it, but at least it's going to help import it for me. Cool, and so this should actually be enough to launch that dialog and say whatever it says inside of it. I forget what it says. It's going to say password dialog works. So let's see if we get that. So I click on this guy and it says password dialog works, which is cool. So now we have the ability to show a dialog, and it's pretty exciting. I'm actually happy with that as the end of this lecture. We did our first ever dialogue. And then for the things that are in it, you just treat it like a separate component, and you can put whatever in it that you'd like. And we'll do that next time. All right. See you then. Bye.